Hi there, this is Ryan Clancy, Chief Strategist for No Labels with Holly Page, who is a co-founder of No Labels. Holly, how you doing?
I'm great, Ryan. How are you?
Well, I'm good. It's been 2 weeks now since No Labels shut down its effort to put forth a unity ticket in the 2024 presidential race. We've all just been sleeping pretty much since then. And now we're at a hibernation, and we're going to talk a little bit about what it meant, what we learned, and what we're going to be doing going forward. Holly, what is your thoughts now that you've had a week or two to marinate on what this all meant?
Yeah, I was going to ask you what stage of grief you were at. I definitely, yeah,
I think I'm still in bargaining.
Yeah. Look, I think an editorial I wrote was published today in Real Clear Politics. I think there was a lot gained by the courageous people who joined us in our effort to give the common sense majority a voice, really. And I think it's our obligation and responsibility now to assess all of those gains, look critically, of course, about everything that we've been through over the last couple of months, but then use the two things that we have that nobody else in national politics seems to have, innovation and agility, to figure out what's next.
I mean, it is still so frustrating, though, because look, when we started this effort 2 years ago, we said, look, there's got to be a couple conditions to put up a ticket. We have to see an opening in the data to suggest the public has a real appetite for that. And then two, we got to find a couple of great leaders who we think could be on the ticket and really could make a serious run. That first condition is still there.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like we shut this down 2 weeks ago and suddenly the public is over the moon about their choices.
Right.
It's still very frustrated. And still, I think a lot of people I still talk to, they still can't really get their arms around this, that this is what we're headed to, because they know there's going to be nothing uplifting about this election. There's going to be really very little discussion about aspirations for the future of this country. It's just going to be this depressing slog for like 8 months. And
I totally agree. And I've been surprised at people who've come out of kind of the other non-political parts of my life to just say how disappointed, depressed, and sad they are, that they are going to be faced with the choice that's coming down the pike. And no matter, as you say, who wins, none of the problems are going to get solved.
Look, that is the reason we're talking today is because this is the first edition of No Labels Talks, which is our new podcast that we're going to be running here going forward. And we really had the perfect first guest, which was Mark McKinnon. Mark McKinnon, former advisor to George Bush, John McCain, host of The Circus, really great show on HBO, which took people really inside how politics works or more often doesn't work. But Mark also was a co-founder of No Labels also. He was there at the inception. So we thought it made a lot of sense to have Mark on to talk about where he sort of sees the country right now, this political moment we're in, and what he sees for No Labels going forward. And I mean, it was, after talking to him for an hour, there's a lot of things to be depressed about, but there are some things that he's surprisingly optimistic about.
I agree. And let me just say, I love the name No Labels Talks because, as you well know, we've had to bite our tongue a lot over the last several months. We've always tried to take the high road and not respond to all of the lies, really, that were thrown at us. Also, I think the way that we built our national network and really kind of got people energized was through our weekly No Labels Talks. So it's great to be able to bring that to more people through this format, and I'm just delighted to be able to, have a format where we can say what needs to be said from our point of view.
Yes, this is going to be. We're going to be a little unshackled now. This is going to be like, George Carlin, Chris Rock. No labels.
Exactly.
We're going to just say what's on our mind. Well, look. Everybody enjoy the first edition of No Labels Talks with Mark McKinnon.
Thanks. And Ryan, if I can add, shout out to Dorsey Cartwright, because let me tell you something. My mother may not listen or watch this, but Dorsey will, and she will make sure that the good people of Texas also get their hands on it. So I just want to do a little shout out to Dorsey.
I have no doubt we are starting with one listener for sure. Hey everybody, this is Ryan Clancy here with you with a common sense talk with the great Mark McKinnon. You've seen some of these talks from us before. We're going to be doing them with a lot more regularity as we head in here into the 2024 election season. As a lot of you know, No Labels recently shut down its effort to find a 2024 unity presidential ticket, but we are not going anywhere because the problems we've identified, the kind of rampant extremism and division in this country, and the need for common sense leadership is stronger than ever. And to talk about some of those challenges and opportunities, we've got Mark McKinnon with us. Mark, thanks for joining.
Glad to be aboard, Ryan.
A lot of you will probably know Mark McKinnon, but for those of you who don't, Mark has had quite a career. He's the co-creator and executive producer of the just concluded documentary series, The Circus, which just had a great 8-year run. He was a former advisor to George W. Bush and John McCain. He was also there at the inception of No Labels and helped found this movement 14 years ago. So, Mark, I want to start with this. You know, we're 7 months out now from the 2024 election. You travel the country a lot. You're talking to voters, people that run campaigns. What is it that you're hearing lately that you find most interesting or surprising about where we are?
Well, I can tell you what's most disheartening and frustrating. So I did a series of speeches last week. In one of the speeches, we asked the question of an audience of about 200. First, we asked how many are Republicans, how many are Democrats, and it was roughly half and half. So it was a pretty representative audience. And we asked the question, how many of you are enthusiastic about your candidate, your nominee for November? And 2 hands went up. Think about that, 2 out of 200.
What kind of audience was it?
Well, it was a healthcare, professional healthcare organization of healthcare professionals that are, and it was, most of the people were probably 40 to 60 years old, and so a group of of professionals, people who are pretty plugged in, for sure, pretty observant and pretty knowledgeable, and they are, and they reflect what I've seen, and you all have seen around the country, which is nobody's happy with this choice. And it's not a surprise. I mean, you cannot be 66 years old and be a park ranger or an airline pilot in America, but you can't be president if you're 15 years older than that. And nobody's happy about that on either side of the aisle. And that's totally understandable because I don't care what you think about Donald Trump or Joe Biden. Neither one is as good as they were 10 years ago, and they're not going to be as good a year from now. And it's the most important job in the world. And it's just insane, this notion that we have a couple of 80-year-olds who will, one or the other of them is going to be president of the United States, barring something that's going to happen in the near future. And
well, the reaction that you saw in your audience is what No Labels identified 2 years ago when we started polling.
Well, that's the $1 million question, Ryan, or $50 million question. And I thought that both Nancy and Mike Rollins wrote great pieces reflecting on the experience. And I'll just let me open the aperture just a little bit. So I was involved in the earlier iteration of this kind of effort, which was the 2012 Americans Elect effort, just because in a broad sense, philosophically, I've always believed in the greatest democracy in the world, there should be more than 2 choices. It's just nuts to me that we only have Coke or Pepsi, that you can't have Mountain Dew or Red Bull in this democracy. And so I've always just in principle supported the notion. But the problem with that is, as you all can attest to quite vividly, is just how difficult that is to do. And the problem is that you can't just wake up in May of an election year, look at the choices and say, oh, we're not happy with that. Let's go run an independent ticket or a third party ticket, unity ticket, because you have to get on the ballot in these states. In order to get on the ballots, you have to get signatures. In order to get signatures, you have to have a ton of money. So you have to start that effort way before that. And that's the smart thing that I think Americans elected and then No Labels opted to do, which is to just pave the runway so that at least it's an option. It's a possibility if we get to the point and weren't happy with those choices. Now, the conundrum is that in 2012, a similar thing happened, which is the runway got paved. They got to sort of the end of the runway, and then again, they weren't able to get a candidate or a ticket. But in that case, it was more understandable because you had Mitt Romney and Barack Obama, arguably two candidates. Well, not arguably, just factually, that was a choice that the country was much happier with. So you'd think that this time, in an instance where the choices are, people are so unhappy with the choices, that this would be the perfect time to have that option. And so that's what's so shocking and surprising to me, is that at a time when it seems like the country, well, not just seems, the country is desperate for another choice, that they wouldn't opt to take that, or that, well, it's not that the voters wouldn't, it's just that the candidates wouldn't. Sure. And I think Nancy and Mike articulated very well, why that's the case. And the reality is that, a number of things going on there. One is that there was, first of all, a massive disinformation campaign, an organized disinformation campaign run against No Labels, which just, I'm familiar with a lot of the players in this sphere, and it was so disheartening for me to see a lot of Democrats just say, well, when they go low, we're going to go lower, and they did go low. They just adopted the worst ethical approaches possible by not just suggesting that it might be a misguided effort and could go off the tracks and maybe help Donald Trump. They said it was an intentional plan to do that.
Folks here know this. They hijacked our website and to suggest we were affiliated with white nationalists.
Astonishing.
So that's the kind of stuff.
Just flat out created a website with Donald Trump on the splash page to give anybody the impression, if you were just a casual observer of this, and that No Labels was proactively supporting Donald Trump. Now, listen, I completely understand the fear that many people had. But what I said to all those people, and what you said, of course, was, listen, I don't know how many times we have to say it. A, we're not going to be a spoiler, period. And B, Joe Lieberman, God bless his heart. And by the way, just a prayer to the great Joe Lieberman. And man, are we going to miss him? Do miss him already. I was so lucky. I talked to some friends of ours who, right after he passed, and they were saying, God, I would have given anything to have a last conversation with Joe. And I did. I literally talked to him hours before he passed. And it was a broad ranging, we obviously talked about No Labels, but we just talked about life and family. I felt so incredibly, I had so much gratitude and was so thankful I got to have that conversation with him, because he was a man in full, man. He was happy, he was blessed, he felt lucky. And, of course, but he was frustrated, like we all are, by what's happening. But Joe Lieberman, I think was a great leader for the organization. Was a great mentor to so many people, and just a great example what we're talking about in terms of no labels. So
Well, more than a few people said the ideal unity ticket candidate would have been a 65-year-old Joe Lieberman.
yes, exactly. I mean, think about Joe Liberman. He's a guy who was very nearly the vice presidential nominee of both parties. So there's nobody that reflected country over party better than Joe. So, but the disinformation campaign was massive, but the other thing I think is that it obviously scared off a number of people, but I mean, just in this poison partisan environment, the point that both Mike and Nancy made is it just takes extraordinary courage and sacrifice for anybody to step into this hellscape.
Yeah.
I mean, who would want to do that? Who would want to give up, whatever life they have to suffer the kind of indignities that people like Nancy had to? And by the way, this again, the disinformation about Nancy and Mark, and by the way, I'm disturbed by, again, to see just the depth of the partisanship in our country, but also the cynicism on the part of the press related to this effort on every level was just I shouldn't be shocked by anything anymore, but there were so many points during all this where I was like, I'd love to just write a book about all this, because there was so much material about just the sense to which articles were written without any sense of checking the facts, and just repeating disinformation that was being circulated by so many people. So anyway, it's not a complete shock to me that again, I understand people's fear of it, but again, No Labels was very clear about the mission, about what the points were at which the effort we pulled down, and No Labels did the right thing. And it's unfortunate, but I'm glad to hear that. But again, both Mike and Nancy and you all saying that you may have pulled it down for now, but the future is wide open, and all we can do is keep suiting up. And that's kind of my big message to everybody in No Labels, is that Ryan and Nancy and Margaret and everybody else, you suffer so many indignities daily from, again, the cynics and the partisans for the work that you do, but which just makes it all the more important that you keep doing it. And because it's a steep hill and a big rock, but you got to keep pushing, got to keep suiting up. And it may not have happened in 2024, but 2028 may be the time. And people, the more you sort of stress test this experiment, the better you get at it, and the more people understand what the mission is and why it's important. And it may be that there's a No Labels ticket in 2028.
Well, Mark, I think you know us well enough to know we're not going anywhere, and we'll get to some of the work we got ahead of us in a minute. But given the fact that unfortunately we do have the race we're going to have now for president, I mean, I wanted to get your sense of just where you think this is headed. I'm sure you saw that New York Times Siena poll over the weekend, which seemed to show President Biden closing the gap some on President Trump, at least with the national numbers. And yet, even there were some really things that would be troubling if you were in the Biden campaign. So for example, they had a question in there whether the respective presidencies, or Trump or Biden, were mostly good for America. And 42% said the Trump years were mostly good for America. Only 25% said that about the Biden years. Then they even actually asked if Trump or Biden were good for democracy. Of course, that's a signature theme of Biden's campaign. He's the democracy candidate. The problem for him in that poll is only 31% said each of them is good for democracy. So it's not even clear he has an advantage there. So how do you assess where the race is at as we sit here 7 months out?
Well, the very first campaign that I did more than 40 years ago was with James Carville, and it was one of his first campaigns as well. And we won a big upset in the primary, And a decision was made after the primary to house James in a separate building because he was scaring the interns so badly. But we had James on. James did the very last interview in the very last episode 130 of our last show last fall. And he said something that was typically very astute from James. And I think maybe the only thing that's really true about this election, which was he said, the era of strategic certainty is over. And by that, he just meant that all the sort of conventional tools that we have used over the years to sort of predict what's going to happen, just throw them out the window, because none of that seems to hold up anymore. And I think it was, you think about this. First of all, we have this rerun that nobody wants to watch. It's two characters about whom it's hard to imagine we could learn anything new. I mean, what are they going to say over the course of the next 7 months that all of us hadn't heard? I mean, what's Biden going to say about Trump? What's Trump going to say about Biden that's going to be new?
Right.
We already know everything about them. And so we have this scenario where under that circumstances, we know the characters so well. They've run before, obviously, been president before. It should be a really static race. In other words, it should be like, this looks like X is definitely going to happen, right? And it's probably not going to change much between now and then. Well, it's changing almost every other week, right? I mean, 2 weeks ago, Trump was a sure bet, then a week ago, it's, well, no, Biden's going his way back. I was just thinking about this, and you just think about the news cycles, what was it? I'm forgetting what week I'm in now, but just a week ago that the Arizona abortion decision came down.
Right.
And suddenly out of the dark, or out of the blue, a state that everybody had said was now definitely Trump in Trump's column, now is definitely in Biden's column, overnight. And then within the same news cycle, there was new inflation news, which was, oh, remember all that stuff about the soft landing, everything being great? Well, hold your horses now. Maybe now there's not going to be a rate cut. Maybe now inflation is looking worse, and maybe it's not going to be so good. And so now that suddenly that economic news, which was trending better for Biden, maybe it's not so good. And so James concluded by saying, I don't know what's going to happen, but a year from now, we're probably going to look back and go, God damn, we didn't see that one coming. So I just think that.
Do you, Mark, think, obviously there's a lot of attention on RFK now, Jr. In fact, the whole sort of campaign that was very focused on destroying no labels, just sort of moved their attention now over to him. Do you think he's going to be a factor in the end? I mean, the big question with him is ballot access. I mean, he's only on a couple ballots right now, but do you think come November he'll still be a major factor? And if so, do you have a sense for how he'll impact the race?
Well, I defer to you, and actually I'm curious to know, because I don't know actually what exactly his ballot access status is, particularly in the 6 states. So let's put that to the side for just a second, because I'd love to hear what the answer to that is. But I will say that if he has access to one or more of those 6 states, the rest of them don't really matter. That it could be a game changer. I mean, it could be determinative. And you think about Jill Stein in 16, you think about Joe Jorgensen in 20. They both had almost insignificant numbers of 1 or 2%, but that number was the number by which the ultimate presidents won their races. Yeah. So Kennedy is now polling at, I don't know, around 15%. I think that number will go down, maybe go down a lot, but 3, 4, 5% in any one of those swing states could swing the election. So update us on the ballot access. Right?
Well, he's only on the ballot in a handful of states. The big wild card is the Libertarians have their convention coming up here in about a month. And there's been some talk he might try to run on their line. And if he did, he'd have a ready-made ballot line in, dozens and dozens of states. then you could see a path to 50. If he does that on his own, so if he continues down this independent route, it might be pretty tough for him, especially now that the respective party establishments in each state have woken up, and they'll probably start harassing him in a similar fashion to what they did, with us.
Yeah. Do you know what the status is in those 6 states of his ballot access?
No, I haven't been keeping tabs on it, but we'll follow it over time. Mark, one of the other things I wanted to, talk to you about is politics is supposed to be about ideas. What a concept. Of course, it's not often later. But for most of our adult lives, there was this consensus that Democrats and Republicans kind of agreed America should be pretty active in leading and shaping the world. I mean, they may have disagreed on how, but there was a general consensus that the world was better off with America out front. And suddenly you see that changing. And of course, probably the starkest example of that is the House's total failure to get an aid bill to the floor to help Israel, Ukraine, Taiwan, even though the Senate passed something 2 months ago. Why do you think this is happening? This increasing isolationist sentiment, and I mean, what do you think it means for the direction of the country?
Wow, well, that's a really big question, and it's again, it's one that's really confounding to me as somebody who walked across the bridge to join George W. Bush and the whole sort of history of a pretty aggressive foreign policy posture, so to see such a 180 on America taking a stand in the world is it baffles me, and again, it's the Republican Party under Trump is just a completely different Republican Party in terms of kind of the demographics, and the policy positions are all. By the way, I meant to mention on the policy position thing again, on the disinformation front, another one that drove me crazy, I know must have driven you absolutely nuts, was that sort of repeated line from either journalists or critics or whoever would say, yeah, and they stand for nothing. This is the organization. How long was that policy piece you all put out? Like,
it was like 80 pages. It had
80 pages.
30 ideas.
80 pages. And Brian, how long was the platform for the Republican National Party in the last election?
Trick question. They didn't have one.
They didn't have one. Yeah. Right. So No Labels that had a tome of very clear policy positions, versus the Republican Party that literally had no platform.
Yeah.
But again, this is again why I think that going forward, the question is, what's the role of No Labels going forward? I just think it's more important than ever. The party, and again, this would be a whole nother Zoom, and we'll be studying it forever about how we got here. But the extremes, it's not that the extremes are big in number; they're just big in volume, right? Yep. And that was the rationale for No Labels. It's like the MAGA forces on the right and the progressives on the left have just these huge microphones and big presence on Twitter or Truth Social or whatever it is, and you'd think, given the echo chamber, that they're these huge majorities of people, when in fact they're not at all. In fact, just the opposite of that. Think about, well, the highest, I won't even talk about the average, but the average viewing audience on Fox or MSNBC is probably, I'd say 700,000. Their highest rated shows, Rachel Maddow and whoever might be on Fox, the Fox, the 5 or whoever, that's maybe 5 million.
Yeah.
So it's less than 1% of the country, right? Yeah. Less than 1% of the country are watching Fox or watching NBC or on Twitter. And yet, just given the ecosystem that we're in, we seem to be drowned by it. But that's why, that was part of Nancy's rationale, and why I wanted to help get this thing up, was to provide a voice for that other 98% of America out there. And again, I think given the isolationist tendency and just the complete breakdown in Congress, that has, in not only Americans turning away in disgust, but actual members leaving in huge numbers because they can't stand it either. But that's why the Problem Solvers Caucus is so important, and to have, members who subscribe to the no labels philosophy out there, because in this kind of environment, you get a solid bloke of 10 votes of common sense problem solvers on any one of these issues, you can swing it. So, I just say it's time to double down and gear up for, many more important fights to come.
Well, it is frustrating. You mentioned this phenomenon of, members retiring. And of course, it's exactly the members you don't want to retire. So like, Mike Gallagher, this great, really promising congressman from Wisconsin, he's leaving, but, Marjorie Taylor Greene is sticking around. That's
exactly right. I mean, Mitt Romney, you can just go down the list, and all the the people that we could count on generally are the ones who are, and understandably the most frustrated.
I mean, Mark,
but again, that's why it's even more important, Ryan, that we count on that handful of no labels problem solvers to get the job done.
Yep. We were talking earlier about the media, and look, I don't want to overdo it. There were some members of the press that really did give us a fair hearing, and they heard us out, and I thought gave us balanced coverage. But there were plenty who didn't. And like a defining feature of our society today is just the total lack of trust in institutions, and people are historically distrustful of the media. I mean, it's under 30% whether people trust the media today. And look, you spend a lot of time in green rooms, on sets. What is it that the media is doing wrong in your view? And like, if you could talk to a room full of reporters and editors and tell them what they should do if they wanted to start to rebuild Americans' trust in what they're reading and hearing, I mean, what would you tell them?
Wow, that's another really big question. I think the greatest casualty of the last decade has been reliable information that the voters can count on, and that's the problem, is that they don't trust the information that they're getting because media's become siloed, and then you can go down the list of look at the Dominion lawsuits and people who were platforming disinformation, and so it's understandable the distrust that people have. So my hope is that the thing that's different, or the evolution, is that as consumers of media and news, we know now, for example, that in the 2016 election cycle, a lot of what people were reading on Facebook and elsewhere was being generated by teenagers from Macedonia and Russian troll farms. And so, of course, that's what's led to the distrust, but it's also led to an increase in knowledge about the importance of finding reliable information. So I kind of flip it on its head and say, the bad news is that there's a ton of disinformation out there. The good news is that that we're aware that it's out there, and that I think that people are and will increasingly kind of move to quality, move to trusted sources, and that those sources will have to earn it, and they've got to prove it. But there's fewer of them. But I think that over time, what's going to happen is people will say, there's a lot of bad information out there, so I've got to, and I'm going to pay a premium for whatever source that might be, to say, I know that they have reliable reporters who produce reliable information. So it's a bit of a kind of a yin and a yang, that there's more, it's easier to get out disinformation more than ever, but but we're aware of it. And I think that people are going to there's going to be a flight to quality, and hopefully that ends up in, a more knowledgeable electorate.
Yeah, I mean, disinformation is of course a big problem, but a related problem that's a little different is just the issue of bias. I mean, one of the things people I'm sure have seen this week is the newsrooms of NPR and the New York Times. There's a big guy who was the business editor for NPR for 25 years, wrote an expose on the Free Press about what he perceived as just rampant bias at the outlet. He actually took the time. He went and looked up the political registration of the people who worked for NPR in Washington, and he found that there was 89 registered Democrats and 0 Republicans. And he said, well, I'm for diversity, and that's important. But how about some viewpoint diversity? How do you think about that, Mark? It does seem to me, at least, is to the extent that over time people keep underestimating, reporters keep underestimating Trump and misunderstanding the source of Trump's support. It has to do in some fact with just the reality that our press doesn't seem to entirely reflect the views and the sensibilities of the people that they're reporting on behalf of.
Well, yeah, and I think the NPR example is a really good one. And I think that, again, I think that stories like that one that's getting a lot of attention are making not only readership, but the sort of ownership of those media outlets more aware that there are consequences to that kind of stacking of the deck. And I mean, your point is the perfect one, which is it's one thing to have diversity in your staff room, but you got to have a diversity of viewpoints too. And it's understandable why, Republicans or Trump supporters would, think that there's a media elite conspiracy against them when they find out that every single one of their reporters are Democrats. I mean, what else are they supposed to think?
Mark, before I let you go, I mean, it has been 40 years now since your first campaign. I don't want to age you or date you here. Well, that adds up to a lot of wisdom. I mean, what is it in your view that has really changed the most as you reflect on your first campaign and how campaigns are run now? And then what really hasn't changed at all? What is the same as when you got on that campaign in 1984 as it is today?
I feel, I've got a lot of Joe Lieberman in me, just in the sense that I feel incredibly grateful. I'm too blessed to be stressed despite it all. I feel really lucky to live where I live, to have the family that I have, the friends that I have, and the career that I've had. And, I loved politics and I loved campaigns, and I have so many good friends and so many great memories of people like Joe Lieberman and John McCain and George Bush, Ann Richards, and so many others. And because again, I'm a prisoner of hope, and I believe that it is a noble pursuit, and we just have to keep supporting encouraging people to get in the arena. It's even, it's more important than ever, because good people are getting out of the arena and they're not getting in. But that was the inspiration for the circus, really, is because I'd worked in campaigns and I'd seen a lot of what goes on behind the scenes. And I've seen the people and the staffers and the family and, this whole constellation of characters beyond the candidates themselves or the office holders themselves that make up this body politic. And as I said, for the most part, they're really good people who are in it for the right reasons and are, want to make positive change for the country. And so the point of the circus was to get behind the scenes and show, 99% of what I saw, the public never, in campaigns, they never saw. And I said, well, maybe if we could show some of that on this show called The Circus, that it would be, informative, educational, interesting, and maybe entertaining at the same time. And so that was the notion. And I still believe that. But what's changed is it's just gotten, as things have gotten more partisan, they've just gotten mean. They've just got fucking mean. And, there was Chuck Todd actually wrote a column recently that I thought was really interesting, where he said, the change in kind of getting to the root of your question, the difference is that campaigns now are more about survival than sort of looking toward optimistic change. I mean, it's like who can survive. It's just a battle for survival rather than I'm slipping on what the greater idea was, but it was, sort of survival versus doing good things. I mean, the purpose was doing good things as opposed to just it's just a battle of survival, and that's sort of where we are right now. But again, I think we're going to push through this, and I think there has been and there's going to be more casualties, but at the end of the day, I think we're going to come out the other side, and we're going to come out the other side because of people like you and people on this call and No Labels who just refuse to give up.
Well, I mean, Mark, I hope you're right. We'll be moving through this Hunger Games campaign era that we're living in. But really so appreciate you joining us here for our Common Sense Talk. As I noted at the top, everybody, you're going to be seeing a lot more of these every week, we hope, with just people like Mark, really good thinkers, people who are committed to this movement, to come in and share their thoughts. Before we let you go, one of the things we do want to do is make sure every week we also just get the pulse of our community and the people who are joining these calls. So we are going to just put up 2 poll questions really quickly, and you can just they should pop up on your screen any minute now. Here you go. So this is really fascinating here. I mean, Mark, I'll just share this with you because I don't know if you can see it. I don't know if you have like hosting privileges or.
Yeah, I do.
We asked everybody. Oh yeah, so we asked everybody whether they thought Trump and Biden should participate in presidential debates. 91% said yes. Here's what's fascinating, though. We also asked, would you be less likely to vote for a presidential candidate if they didn't participate in debates? 65% said yes. So to the extent that there's anybody listening in Trump and Biden campaign worlds, hopefully they recognize this is something voters care about. What a crazy concept. Voters would actually like the people running for the highest office in the land to actually make a pitch for it. Well, thank you all, everybody, for joining us. Mark, any closing thoughts you want to leave with our community before you?
Well, I guess just again, it takes real perseverance to keep fighting against the partisanship and the cynicism, and but it's just more important than ever. And so I just say that kick it hard, carry on regardless, and some of the most important work of No Labels is ahead. So just keep digging.
Fantastic. Thank you, Mark, again for joining. Thank you, everybody, for being with us, and hopefully we'll see you again soon on the next Common Sense Talk.